Good evening and welcome to my How Healthy Are You weekly educational call. My name is Dr. Thomas Brewer. I'm a PhD chemist, and for this evening's call I have a couple of questions that I'm going to be going over and answering. The first one I had to put off a week because I had too much to say last week. This question came in about a week ago, and it's a very good question because it's about yeast and fungus and the cause and the solution and what's going on in the body. And I'm going to add to the question where a lot of it starts, and that is bacteria. So the progression of parasitic type problems go from parasitic bacteria, which we would think of as the type of bacteria I would see during a blood microscopy. And the next stage is yeast. Yeast formation, a lot of people think of it as candida. And then the final stage is fungus. Often when I see yeast in the blood, if a person's had it a long time, I'll also pick up fungus. If they've had fungus a long time, I rarely even see yeast. It's all been converted to fungus. But this is the progression, and the problem with this progression is as you go from bacteria to yeast to fungus, you increase your chances for the dreaded C word disease, cancer. And you've heard in articles and perhaps on the internet how a lot of cancers are caused from bacteria. Well, that's where that comes from. It's that progression from bacteria to yeast to fungus and its effect on the body. Now, these are living organisms that get into our bloodstream, but there really shouldn't be anything alive in our blood. Our red blood cells are not living cells. If I add up all the red blood cells and the white blood cells and the platelets, I can make a person, but the individual cells are not living cells. So they don't respirate, they don't eat, they don't poop, they don't move under their own power. Often I'll be doing a blood microscopy and someone say, well, my red blood cells are really alive, they're moving. Well, they're just flattening out on the slide. When you see red blood cells moving, it's really an artifact of the testing procedure. They're not living cells, they don't swim in the blood. But parasites and yeast and fungus in the blood, they're moving under their own power. And what's particularly bothersome is they eat food before we get to extract the nutrients, and we have to deal with their waste stream. So since they're alive, they consume food and they poop. So our body has to get rid of what they're pooping. Sometimes with good bacteria, that would be the probiotic bacteria, what they're pooping is really good for us, and that's what we live on. I know that sounds kind of gross, but to a biochemist, most of us live on what the bacteria in our gut leave behind. And that may not be too comforting because we always think when we consume food, we're the first ones to utilize it. But without the good gut bacteria, the probiotic bacteria, we wouldn't be able to do much with the food we eat. Not all of it, but most of it. So the bacteria, the yeast, and the fungus, they create a big problem in our blood. They create a big problem in our gastrointestinal system. And one of the symptoms that is very common is you'll get diarrhea or loose bowel sometimes you'll get alternating bouts of constipation with diarrhea, and that's typically with fungal infections. Now, this progression is similar to something I talked about way back in January or February of this year. It was before the COVID-19 scare. I did a 2-part series on Epstein-Barr virus and the progression, the 4 phases. And with bacteria, yeast, and fungus, I mean, it's a similar issue with the phases. And if you don't do something about it, you end up progressing. Now, a lot of people have very good immune systems just naturally. And before bacteria can stay in the system long enough to morph into yeast and fungus, their white blood cells and the probiotic bacteria kill the bad bacteria, the parasitic bacteria. And those people wouldn't even notice any symptoms. I may see parasites in their blood, but they really don't have any symptoms because their immune system is so strong. But when the immune system is compromised for whatever reason, either poor diet, not enough sleep, not enough vitamin D, i.e. a little bit of sunlight, and a lot of other factors that affect our immune system, but it's mainly diet, sleep, stress, and a few key nutrients, then the parasites and yeast and fungus get out of hand. So what we need to do to fight this from happening is first keep the immune system strong. And I'm sure everyone has been inundated with information about their immune system the past 7 months of the COVID-19 issue. So eating right means fruits and vegetables just happen to feed the probiotic bacteria. They're known as prebiotics. I mentioned that in a YouTube video, which is on both my Facebook page and YouTube. But prebiotics are the food for probiotics, and you get them from fruits and vegetables. Now, mushrooms are considered very good, but I mean, pretty much all fruits and vegetables will feed the probiotic bacteria, and that's what you want to do so you can fight off the bad bacteria and the yeast and the fungus. So a good diet is where it starts. It's always that way. No matter what I talk about, it always goes back to diet. Anytime I talk about health, which is every day, it goes back to diet, and the ultimate way to eat is quite a bit of fruits and vegetables. I don't necessarily advocate people going 100% vegan or 100% vegetarian, but shifting toward that is very smart. And if you can go all the way, that's fine. Depends on who you are and your exercise level and what kind of supplements you're taking to be vegan, for instance. But there's always a way to do it if that's what you want to do. So diet is really important. Now, supplement-wise, the best thing to prevent a problem is to ensure you've got plenty of probiotic bacteria in your gut or gastrointestinal system. That's where probiotics come in. And I recommend either my probiotic at a maintenance dose of 1 per day, or switch off between mine and a different brand. Perhaps every other day, take a different brand, because that way you get different strains of probiotic bacteria. Most people, especially people that sell probiotics and supplements, don't want you to know that only one brand is never as good as 2 different brands that utilize different strains. Now, that's not necessarily true with respect to other supplements, but with probiotics, it is. So probiotic intake is how you prevent the problem. If you have bacteria, yeast, or fungus problem, now comes a little more work. So the probiotic dosage is going to go up from 1 a day to 3 a day, and maybe even higher, up to 6 per day for a few weeks, 2 to 4 weeks, before dropping back down to 3 a day and then dropping back down to 1 probiotic per day, maintenance dose once everything is fine. The other thing that's important with parasites, yeast, and fungus is they feed on simple carbohydrates, i.e. sugars, and anything that is a simple carbohydrate. I have another video, a carbohydrate hierarchy or hierarchy video. I talk about the good and bad carbohydrate sources. So it's not that carbohydrates are good or bad. It depends on the source of food they're coming from. It really bothers me when I hear people talking about carbs as if carbs are bad and they're limiting their carb intake. How ridiculous. That means they're limiting their fruit and vegetable intake, which is exactly what you need for health and nutrition. So the simple carbs, the bad carbs, let's say, the ones that convert to glucose very quickly, these are the ones to minimize so that you don't grow bad bacteria, yeast, and fungus. So the parasitic bacteria, yeast, and fungus feed on these simple carbohydrates, the glucose that they produce very quickly, and then you need more probiotics to get back into balance in your gut. So if you stop feeding the bad guys in your gut, then the probiotics have a better chance. Now, if that doesn't work and you already have a big problem, and one way you can tell is if you look at your tongue, it won't be red, it'll be somewhat white, and if it's really bad, you'll even see a little bit of green on the tongue. Well, then you'll have to call in the big guns, which would be the lightning colloidal silver. So that's colloidal silver made with lightning, a very high voltage so that the silver ions are completely ionized and not stuck together. Proper concentration would be 10 parts per million, and which is right out of the bottle. But you'd have to take that, again, for about 2 to 4 weeks, and you would take 1/2 ounce 2 times per day, swish and swallow, and you would do that on an empty stomach, just maybe 15 up to 30 minutes before a meal, but it doesn't have to be that long, just an empty stomach, and let it get to your bloodstream and let it work in your gut. And you do that when there isn't food there for the gut and for your bloodstream. Swishing it in your mouth, there's a lot of blood receptors, so you can get some benefit from the colloidal silver in your bloodstream without it first having to pass through your gut. So you end up doing both when you swish and swallow on an empty stomach. So that's the big gun to get rid of yeast and fungus. Parasitic bacteria, usually you can deal with probiotics, not all the time, especially with Lyme disease and other bloodborne pathogens. They typically need the colloidal silver treatment, and even cycles where you're on colloidal silver for 2 weeks, and then you're off of it for 2 weeks, and then you're on and off for 2 weeks, and you keep cycling. And every time you stop the colloidal silver, you take probiotics, but every time you take colloidal silver, you never take probiotics at the same time. And when I say the same time, I don't just mean that day, I mean that whole cycle. Don't take any probiotics if you're taking colloidal silver for 2 weeks, no probiotics for 2 weeks. If you take colloidal silver for 4 weeks, same thing, no probiotics for 4 weeks. And that way the colloidal silver can do its job, and it's acting as essentially an antibiotic, anti-mold, anti-yeast, antifungal. So I believe that's the answer for Rhonda. Now, another question I've been getting pretty consistently is people coming into the office and wanting to know how to boost their metabolism and burn fat and essentially lose weight, but they really are referring to fat weight. And a lot of them don't really want to do a diet. And the diet I recommend is called the slow carbohydrate diet. And if somebody wants, I can talk about that in a future call. So it doesn't mean low carbohydrate, it's slow burning carbohydrates. And you do that 6 days a week, and on the 7th day you eat anything you want. But some people just don't want to do that, and they just want to know, what can I quickly do or take something to boost my metabolism? It turns out you really don't need to take anything. Things like ephedra, which has ephedrine in it, and other weight loss supplements, some of the ingredients are banned. You don't need them, and I don't recommend them anyway. The simple way to do this is with water. So numerous studies have found that an extra 2 cups of water 3 times a day is better than ephedra for weight loss and fat loss. So I'll say that again, 2 cups of water, these are extra cups above and beyond what you're doing, 3 times a day is better than weight loss supplements. Now, if this information got out there and someone advertised it, they'd probably get killed because the weight loss industry is huge. There's so many overweight people, and everyone's looking for a way to lose weight. And in reality, it's right in front of them, and it's free, pretty free. It's just water. So taking water into your mouth and swallowing it, what it does is it increases an adrenal hormone. And that adrenal hormone gets into your bloodstream and your metabolism goes up, which is the whole point of burning fat, is to increase your metabolism. That is why people do these slow carb and no carb diets and keto diet and Atkins diet, which are all based on carbohydrates, and any other diet. It's all about raising your metabolism so you burn fat. And just drinking the extra 2 cups of water 3 times a day, the increase in metabolism is somewhere between 10 to 30%. That translates to about 25 calories. So if you drink an extra 2 cups of water 3 times a day, that's 75 extra calories getting burned, and it adds up, and it's free. It's just a simple thing to do. Now, speaking about water, what athletes do to increase their metabolism and lose fat is the same thing you can do, and that's called thermogenesis. And what that boils down to is the fact that humans are warm-blooded. So if we drink something cold or are around something cold externally, like cold air, cold winter day, or cold water in a cold bath, a cold swimming pool, our body must maintain a constant temperature. In order to do that, it must burn calories, which is a unit of heat energy. So it must burn heat, calories. Essentially, your metabolism goes up and you burn fat. So if you're drinking these 2 cups of water 3 times a day, I recommend it being cold. Now, normally I don't tell people to drink cold water because it decreases your enzymatic activity when you're consuming a meal. But this isn't water consumed with a meal. There's a big difference. If you're consuming water with a meal, then you want a small amount of warm water, typically something like the temperature of tea or slightly cooler, but definitely slightly warm water with a meal and not too much of it. But for thermogenesis, drink cold water, those extra 2 cups 3 times a day. If it's cool or cold water, you'll have more thermogenesis. You will burn more fat. Now, you can also do this externally, and this is what athletes do when they need to make weight. And I've worked with a number of athletes, especially the UFC fighters. They use these cold baths, and they are so tough they put ice in there. And they're just shivering and shaking. But that shivering is what burns fat, and they can burn fat pretty fast. Now, I mentioned this a long time ago. There's an easy way for us to do that without subjecting ourselves to actual ice water. At the end of your shower, turn the temperature down gradually or quickly, whatever you want, until it starts getting cold, and see how long you can withstand it. But that little bit will help you burn fat. It will be a metabolism booster. And, it's just a simple thing to do. You're just using physics to your advantage. And in general, when drinking water, I've also advocated it's really good to drink a glass when you first get up. Even before that, half a lemon in warm water, that is my morning routine. It's good to have just some straight water before then, because you're very dehydrated when you wake up, and without water, your enzymatic activity drops way down. The other great thing about water is, if necessary, it'll lower your heart rate. So if your heart rate's really high for some reason, drinking water could even save someone's life by lowering the heart rate. Water is very special for us, and fortunately most of the planet is water. But it's just a wonderful molecule for our bodies. So that's all I have for this evening's call. If you have a question for next week's call, or if you want me to talk about the slow-carb diet in detail and go over it, I will. But anything else, call, text, or email me. And I just want to say thanks for listening.